This is a day of celebration, so I'd like the narrative for the questions that I ask you and for the whole session to be one of positivity. It's a day, I think, for us to celebrate e-mobility. This year has not been the most celebratory of years, so let's hold that thought in mind. So if you could, in that thought then, give me some opening gambit notes about your vision for NewMotion as a company that's delivering on decarbonisation. What's your sense of that from NewMotion's perspective and perhaps your own personal perspective?
Yeah, sure. So thank you for that. So I don't know how much the audience know about NewMotion. So just a little bit of background. So for those who don't know, NewMotion is a Shell group company, and Shell set itself an ambition to become a net zero emissions energy business by 2050 or sooner if possible. And as part of that drive have been making investments and changes to the overall portfolio. And so they bought NewMotion in 2017. And I guess our role in the portfolio, if you like, our mission is to kind of collaborate in enabling as people to travel as many kilometers as possible, powered by clean energy. So that's our kind of raison d'etre. That's why we exist, and everything that we do is kind of geared towards that. So we operate now in 35 countries with over 200 partner networks, 165,000 charge points everywhere, and all across those 35 countries in Europe, and over 70,000 people carry one of our tokens or cards that enable them to then, access those networks. So we've been in this industry now for 10 years and feel that we've got a lot to bring to the table in terms of, what we've learned over the course of that journey. Now, I myself have only been here for 5 months now. 3 of those months were stuck in Singapore due to COVID, so I was running the business remotely. And then the last few months I've been based here in Amsterdam. And I guess in those first few months, what I've really been struck by is just how dynamic and fast moving the industry is, even with the COVID impacts. And so clearly eMobility, is here to stay through the recovery. Clearly the number of EVs and the number of people making that pledge to transition to EV in the future is growing exponentially. So hugely exciting industry to be a part of. And I guess when you asked the question about our vision, so I've explained what our purpose is, our reason for being is. But in terms of our vision, there's probably 2 parts to it. So one is we want to help customers go through their own personal energy transition at home, at work, and on the go. And we recognize that in addition to having kind of hardware and software solutions that enable them to do that, so they need the charge points in the right place, they need the software that enables them to manage their power consumption. They need to know where the charge points are. We also recognize that customers are increasingly going to want access to green, sustainable energy supply. And so that's really where being part of the overall ecosystem of Shell comes in, as that very much fits with Shell's broader aspirations. So helping customers transition, whether at home, at work, or on the go, and then really working forward to help put a power base beneath that of green, sustainable energy.
Thanks very much indeed, Mel, for that opening gambit. Let's move on to the green recovery piece then now. I mean, do you in your as CEO of Shell NewMotion, do you see governments, investors, and board level decision making speeding up in the post-COVID transition to green recovery? Do you see an injection of energy in the sector from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I've been really struck actually just by how much energy there is around the transition even through COVID. And so we've seen, in fact, if you talk to our head of sales, he would say anything but it slowed down. So the appetite within the business community to accelerate that transition, the incentives and the mandates and even just the dialogue, I guess, at government and boardroom level hasn't dissipated at all, which is really encouraging. I think maybe at the beginning of COVID, people were quite concerned that sustainability agenda might might dissipate somewhat, but certainly that hasn't been our experience. And and even in the past few months, announcing partnerships with a range of other OEMs, lease companies, and other business partners, I think this goes to demonstrate that the appetite is growing, if anything, certainly not reducing.
Very good. Encouraging to hear. What's your, lastly, a last question before I go over to questions from the audience. Do you personally see electrification as happening more quickly than many of the analysts predict? Do you see a tipping point? There have been some interesting numbers published over the last few weeks with the take-up of electric vehicles. What's your sense of that trajectory for the take-up of EVs?
Yeah, certainly, and I think our view would be that tipping point is imminent, and what comes with that tipping point is obviously scale. And as you get scale, a lot of the pieces of the kind of the value chain, I think, that need to be in place, become more urgent, but also the incentives are there to make sure it happens. So things like, for example, as we were just talking about before, the access to a broader network. So yes, I mean, it is great that everybody is in the UK is only 25 miles from a fast charger, but if you look at the infrastructure that's needed over the next few years, by 2030, I think the estimate is we need 3 million charge points by 2030, and we've across Europe, and we've only got 185,000 at the moment. So I think that tipping point is coming. But I think with that tipping point comes an urgency around the infrastructure that we need to support that. We know that one of customers' biggest concerns is range anxiety. So in our recent EV driver survey, range anxiety was one of their biggest concerns, and continues to be. So that open access, interoperability that was talked about before, I mean, I think remains really at the forefront of our priority. And I think obviously price still remains a concern for customers. They're investing in an EV, but as you see more and more models now coming onto the market, I think with the greater degree of consumer choice and different price points, again, that will also accelerate and move us further towards that tipping point as well. So yeah, I think we're really encouraged by what we see at the moment, and the kind of the coming together of government incentives and mandates, kind of consumer demand, and the increasing investment in infrastructure by companies like NewMotion and Shell, I think create the right environment for that tipping point to happen sooner rather than later.
Very good, very encouraging, Mel, very encouraging indeed. So I'll open up to some questions from the online audience now. You mentioned that having Shell behind you is a supporting structure. There's a question from Stephen Wright who asks about that. He says, does having a large utility company like Shell behind NewMotion, is that a huge positive benefit for the injection of energy and frankly investment in your work?
Yeah, it is very much so. I mean, I think the solutions that we need to accelerate the energy transition are going to require, real collaboration across all parts of the energy ecosystem. It's investment into infrastructure, it's scale up of new supply chains, deployment of new technology, new business models, customer propositions. I mean, there's a lot to do. And I think what Shell brings deep expertise in all of those areas. And so what it gives us as an organization, although we're run very much as a separate entity, we kind of have access to that expertise, which, hopefully is the best of both worlds. So, a more agile organization with a really specific mission, but with access to the kind of depth of expertise that Shell can bring as well.
Very good. Another Shell-related question from Neil Wallace, who highlights that you're on the Shell side. Sinead Lynch has suggested that there could be a phase out of internal combustion engine vehicles by 2030 in the UK. Do you think that's a possibility?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So we're I know that was just a few weeks ago that she made that statement. So we're very encouraged by that, and very encouraged by the momentum that we see, particularly in the UK, other European markets as well. But those kind of commitments that are made both at government level and by senior infrastructure partners across the country, I think are really encouraging, and will, once those statements are out there, the momentum is there to drive towards them. So yes, we think it's possible, and yes, we're fully supportive of that.
Very good. One final question from our online audience, and there have been a number of questions come in, so I have absolutely no chance of going through them all, but there's another interesting question here from Aaron Anand, who says, how is Shell and Shell NewMotion ensuring that green energy is part of your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we very much, as a broader Shell entity, I mean, you would have read, we're very supportive of the Paris Agreement and the need to, for society as a whole to transition. There's obviously no single solution to achieving that. So we are taking a kind of a multi-pronged approach. So we've already invested actually, billions of dollars in a number of low carbon technologies, including, biofuels, hydrogen, wind power, as well as, everything that NewMotion is doing, as well as smart energy charging. So I think in terms of what we're doing, very much investing in those new energy businesses that we see as being fundamental to the energy transition for society as a whole. For NewMotion in particular, as I said right at the beginning, in terms of our aspirations, one is to create the infrastructure that for people to feel really confident making that switch to an EV. But the other is working with Shell so that we can start to supply green energy. So at the moment, if you charge at one of our network charge points, then we assure that the supply of that energy is from a green energy source. And at the moment, we do that by making sure that we get the guidance of origin certificates, which can, which assure the energy that we're purchasing is from a sustainable source. But that's just the start, I think. I mean, the ambition is that through the network of charging infrastructure, we would really want to be able to ensure that, drivers everywhere have got access at home, at work, and on the road to sustainable power.
Well, thanks so much indeed to our questions from the audience and from those questions between you on the panel. And perhaps one last final single question from me. I mean, if there was one thing that you were looking for in terms of a green recovery and the e-mobility sector, so what would that be from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the other guys very much in terms of what they've just highlighted, incentives and transparency. I think I'd build on that by saying partnerships and collaboration. So I've been very struck being in the industry that the value chain is quite complex. There's lots of different players, there's lots of different business models. And I think as people have reflected on green shoots and a movement is at a tipping point, that I think to continue that momentum and to really drive that to that tipping point, we will need across the industry partnerships and collaboration so that we can give customers what they need in terms of infrastructure. The point's been raised already about the need for education, really helping customers understand what this energy shift looks like. Business models that collectively help us be competitive, and the right regulatory environment. So yeah, for me, I guess it's this partnership and collaboration. I don't think any one entity or any one industry is going to kind of do it on their own, and so we're going to have to be quite open to working together to drive the momentum.